Buongiorno, dobro jutro, and finally good morning, and kind greetings from the adult education community in Slovenia. There are several stakeholders in this community, but I will talk about them a little bit later. I was asked by the organizers to speak about our national project for the implementation of the European program, but also about adult education in general, and especially about adult education and ICT. But before that, I would like to give you some background. You know, Slovenia is your neighboring country, we're close, and you also know some of these facts. It's a very small country which gained independence in 1991 with a population of 2 million. Half of them are the labor force of our country, and quite a lot of them are above 15 years, 1.7 million, which means that we have a very large field, a very big share of population that we are supposed to work with. We have nowadays a very high registered unemployment of 13%, and a growing number of immigrants, but also, unfortunately, a growing number of immigrants, brain drain. A lot of young, educated people go outside. They go to several different places in the world where they hope will have a better life. The average age is 42 years, and the expected lifetime of women, female, is still a bit longer than the one of males. So instead of having the population pyramid, we have this picture here, but I'm sure you have pretty much the same situation, an aging population. If we look at the educational structure, we are proud of having made a big progress in this field because a much smaller share of people now have incomplete basic education. A bigger share, therefore, have basic or even secondary educational achievements, and the share of tertiary education has grown as well. But still, we have a lot of work to do in adult learning and education. So we developed this system throughout the years since we gained independence, somehow in parallel with the political process. And we also had a very big support by policy, the educational part as well as the labor part in developing our adult education system. We started with the White Book in 1995. And then that led to the Act on Financing and Organizing Education, and within this Act, which takes care of all levels of education, of course, we have an Adult Education Act, which defines the status of adult education and learning, but gives much emphasis to non-formal education and learning, because we feel that this is the big potential that we have to work on. And our public financing and governance is regulated by the Adult Education Master Plan, or we call it also the National Program for Adult Education. Up until now, we had the issue of this master plan from 2005 until 2010. But right now, this week, the Parliament will discuss and probably also confirm the Adult Education Master Plan for the next period, 2013 until 2020. Of course, in all these processes, we try to follow European policy in the field of education as much as possible. So we are in line with Europe 2020, with education and training 2020, and of course with the renewed adult education agenda. What is maybe interesting for you too, we are trying to follow a holistic approach to adult education. Therefore, there are four, or actually three priority areas, which is general, non-formal adult education, formal adult education, and job-related adult education. And of course, we need supporting activities such as training of adult educators, guidance and information, quality, things like that, that support the above priority areas. All these priorities, goals, also the financing, everything is embodied in the so-called annual adult education programs, and I will talk a bit about this later on. But in the background, we all the time, or actually since 2007, have the lifelong learning strategy, because we want to make adult education one of those moving forces that takes care of lifelong, but also life-wide aspect of education, but also of life in general. The stakeholders, I mentioned them before. There is the Ministry of Education, Science and Sport taking care of adult education, but of course of all the other levels, primarily actually as well. We have a directorate and a unit for adult education at this ministry, which supports adult education and the work of our institute, which is the Slovenian Institute for Adult Education, up to 70%. 30% of support comes from the Ministry of Labor, Family, Social Affairs and Equal Opportunities, which works through the National Labor Office as well, and has a special fund also for the development of human resources. Of course, there are municipalities. They are in charge of financing and taking care of adult education at the very local level. We have this Slovenian institute, where I come from, that is in charge of the development at the national level, actually an umbrella institution, maybe something like Isfol, and a whole network of adult education providers, especially adult education centers, public institutes. We also call them folk high schools. Then units for adult education at secondary schools, but also in enterprises. We have private providers, of course, and many other stakeholders, libraries, cultural homes, NGOs, and so on. And if you look at the widest definition of adult education, there are around 1,000 players in the field. But if you look at the more narrow definition and at public financing, there are about 200 of them that we usually work with. Some effects of the national program or master plan, former one actually, we managed really to determine priorities, determine target groups that deserve our special attention, and these are mainly the 45 plus. We set some benchmarks, even achieved them, and financing was relatively stable. So our participation rate, the national goal was 15%, and we achieved it. In 2011, it was even 16.9, but now it dropped a little bit, which makes us the sixth successful country in the European Union, and the first as far as new member states are concerned. But this success is something we are proud of. On the other hand, we are very careful, because we know that in this participation rate, many people who have already achieved a high educational level are included. They are the ones who have time, money, opportunities to participate in adult learning. Our second goal was to achieve an 85% share of adults aged 25 to 64 with at least secondary education, and the percentage right now is 84.5. And we are quite proud with this, but we know that the share of adults with secondary education is relatively low. It's only 57%, and this is our goal in the next perspective. So the way ahead, as I said, these days in Parliament there will be a discussion on the new master plan, and there are always discussions how to get a good balance between employability but also general knowledge, so adult education for acquiring basic skills so that new jobs could be created, that creativity would be stimulated, things like that. Accreditation of prior non-formal and informal learning is another issue that we will take care of in the new perspective. The most vulnerable groups, unemployed, older people, migrants, still have not reached satisfactorily. So the national participation benchmark will now be 19%, and as I said before, we want to have 63% of adults 25 to 64 years old with secondary education, because we know that secondary education is really that threshold which enables people to function properly in nowadays society. On the other hand, we have PIAC, a study that is going on all over the world actually, and especially the European Communion is waiting for the results, which will give us information on the actual skills of adults. And this picture has not been good in the past for Slovenia, so there are really challenges ahead for us. Public financing. We have, for this year, around 35.5 million of public financing for these four priority areas that I mentioned before, and 60% is coming from Europe, from the European Social Fund. In this coming period, we expect around 25 million per year. Actually, the Ministry of Education dropped. It will only contribute half of the funds that it used to provide, but the Ministry of Labor will continue with 15.9, something like that, annually. It is the plan that in this next perspective, other ministries, like the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Culture, and many others, of course also municipalities, but also enterprises, and of course there will be some money from the new European Social Fund perspective, others should contribute more. So that by the end of 2020, in these coming years, we will invest around 400 million in adult education. A lot, little, I don't know, but it's enough, I think, for Slovenia to achieve the goals I mentioned before. Adults and ICT skills. Figures here show that we have quite a big share of internet users and quite a lot of households with computer. But we think that this is due to younger generations and to employed people. So there are still some groups, target groups, that need our special attention. Older age groups, low qualified, low skilled people, unemployed, and especially people living in rural areas. So the government is investing quite a lot in stimulating ICT use, and I will give you two examples. One is an example funded by the European Social Fund and by the Ministry of Education. It's a network of 14 lifelong learning centers in Slovenia. They are led by 14 adult education centers, which used to provide information and guidance, but added also into the provision of these lifelong learning centers non-formal learning, different courses and like that. Each of these learning centers has around 20 lifelong learning points, meaning that at different venues, such as municipalities, homes for retired people, clubs of the elderly, cultural homes, and so on, in these venues, they have one or more learning places where people have access to ICT-based learning, access to e-material, and they even have support of tutors if they want such support. At these lifelong learning points, they also organize all kinds of non-formal learning, and it proved to be very successful if it is connected to specific goals. For example, older people or farmers come to such learning points and they learn through ICT how to apply for European funds for their farms. So if there is a specific goal, such learning is really the most efficient. The second example is not financed by the government. It's called the Symbiosa project. It's actually a project of young people, very dynamic, very proactive, and they organized intergenerational ICT learning in order to raise literacy, illiteracy, and stimulate solidarity among generations, and of course lifelong learning. Mentors in this project are young people, volunteers, average users of ICT, and on the other hand we have older people. Even grandchildren can apply for their grandfather, grandmother in order to get engaged in this project. Venues are primary, secondary schools, even our adult education centers, where this year, during the 21st until the 25th of October, these people will be taught by young people how to use the computer, how to use Microsoft Word, mobile phone, Facebook, and so on. And sponsors, please have a look at this, our provider, the provider of telecommunications, Slovenia, Microsoft, insurance companies, where the money is, I would say. Now my third point, actually our national project. We stemmed from our experience in the awareness-raising field of adult education. We have an 18-year experience with our Lifelong Learning Week, which is a learning festival. And this year, for example, we have 1,300 providers of events throughout the country and 9,400 events, meaning that at different places in Slovenia, educational promotional, social events, sports events were organized in order to promote, to raise the visibility of adult education, or actually lifelong learning. And we have a 17-year experience in giving awards for exceptional achievements in adult learning, giving awards to individuals, but also to groups and institutions. And you can even have a look at these stories because they are supported by short 3-minute videos and they're quite inspiring. And based on all this experience, we designed the project in order to support the implementation of the European program. We added to this huge amount of events, learning parades, 7 per year. So in May we had the first learning parade in 7 places in Slovenia, 7 communities, where they organized a learning festival, meaning that in public places, like in squares, public squares, or in front of municipalities, all the providers in that community introduced their educational programs, non-formal kinds of learning. They had taster sessions, but also appearances on stage where successful learners could show what they have learned, what they are doing, things like that. We had a very strong political support coming from the national level, but also all mayors took part, and they promised to take care of adult education in the future even more, finance it, and so on. So learning parades are one aspect, really awareness raising on the importance of adult learning and education in the country. The second strand of our project is video production. We produced until now 3 videos. One is on non-formal learning for the unemployed people. The second is a literacy, an example of a literacy program in the rural area. Actually, it's in the Socha River, close to the Italian border. And the third one, it's on information and guidance, also validation of non-formal and informal learning. All these videos are about half an hour long, and they have English subtitles. And if you are interested, you are of course invited to see them, to have a look. All these activities have been strongly supported by the project website, which is our main ICT tool, but we have also other tools. And here is the introductory page of the website and the link. And due to shortage of time, I would stop here. I am available to you during the break and further on to answer your questions if you have any. And of course, I would like to invite you to visit this page and see for yourself what we are up to. I wish you a lot of success with your project, with all the focus groups, national conferences, and other activities that consist.